Hey guys, it's Joe. Thanks for joining us again. We actually have a small interim video, if you will, before we give our 4,000 mile update. In this video, we weren't expecting to do, although we were seeing a number of things on the forum. You guys may be aware, Mike and I, we have a lot of laughs out on the trail, but today we'd like to talk about something that's very, very serious. And no, I'm not talking about snow blindness and cats. What I'm talking about, the topic on everyone's mind, is how much oil or two-stroke oil does your machine use? And I didn't realize it was a very serious topic until more recently. I noticed that on a number of threads, there's a bit of debate, sometimes some anger and disbelief in terms of the mileage that people are getting, both high and low, out of a quart of two-stroke oil. And I'm here to say that the answers, they vary all over the place. And apparently, I didn't realize this was such a hot button ticket or hot button item. Apparently it's as debatable as fuel economy, which we'll also cover in this video, as well as which type of oil you should use. For today, I'm not going to cover that information. There's a number of other arguments out there, or I should say information out there on which oil you should use. But I will mention here at the end of the video why we do from time to time. We run VES and we also run AMSOIL Interceptor from time to time. I'll mention why that is towards the end of the video. But really, this one here, we want to jump in and walk through, and we have some videos built into this. We went ahead and did an empirical method to figure out what our actual mileage was per quart. I think you'd be rather surprised on our findings. But before we get there, let's take a look at some information that's important in determining your miles per gallon or your fuel and or your oil usage. Thanks guys, and I hope you enjoy this short video. One other thing for you keen-eyed observers that are out there, you may notice that I'm sitting on, this is a video for the VR1 Matryx 850. Yes, no doubt about it. And you'll notice that I'm not necessarily sitting on a VR1 Matryx Indy 850. We tried to get one by on you, but we couldn't. The truth of the matter is that our VR1s, both Mike's and my VR1, they are at the dealership, unfortunately. We're going to cover exactly why that is in another brief video here that we're going to release within a day or two. But they are both, unfortunately, sick at the dealership and getting repaired. So, yep, you guys, we couldn't sneak one by you keen-eyed fellows out there. This is a Polaris Indy. We thought it was the closest thing we could do for this video. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoy this. So I guess the first question to ask is, and it's rather important to ask ahead of time, is why do you want to know? Why would you want to know what your fuel economy is, and why would you want to know what your oil economy is? Maybe it is that you are planning a long trip and you want to make sure that you pack and stack along enough oil. Candidly, we've been in this situation before where we crossed the border into Canada at a Sault Ste. Marie, and we did a 6-day ride or 5.5-day ride through Canada. And what surprised us is that we couldn't, unlike being in the UP of Michigan, where off the trails the majority of the gas stations actually have oil, we found it very difficult to find two-stroke oil in the same way in Canada. We were used to pulling up, finding a gas station that's off trail. Usually they would carry a product like Interceptor, if you will, or even VES for that matter. And we were just not that lucky or able to find those. Not saying that they don't exist, but we weren't fortunate enough to find those. So what we ended up doing through most of the days is we would find where Polaris dealers were en route. And while we were going, we would kind of detour or find an off-trail way to get to the Polaris dealer on a daily basis to get another gallon of two-stroke oil to put into our sleds to keep on going. So that might be a good reason to do it. Or you might be trying to compare whether you should go for a 4-stroke model or a 2-stroke model. Obviously, there are a number of benefits to the 2-stroke as well as the 4-stroke. One of the main drawbacks of a 2-stroke motor is, one, it doesn't last as long on the top end, and two, you have to keep putting oil in it every time you stop for fuel. Not every time, but a lot of times you stop for fuel, you have to put oil in. So you might be trying to compare from a cost perspective if it's better to have 4-stroke or 2-stroke. Of course, the flip side of that coin is that a 2-stroke motor is relatively inexpensive to build. There are kits that are, for the top end only, call it 5,000 or 6,000 miles in or even more. These days with the latest technology, that you go ahead and rebuild them, and it's less than $500 for the kit, and away you go. Regardless, what I find on a lot of the debates on the forums is it turns into a who's right, who's wrong, but what they don't ask to begin with is, why do you want to know? What is the main reason for figuring that out? And candidly, if it's to know how much oil to take along, you want to err on the side of caution. If you're taking a long trip, you need to figure out also how much oil to take a backpack with you. You need to err on the side of caution. And so what you'd want to do then is to get the number that would be obviously the least conservative for oil and for fuel economy. Anyhow, my only point in starting this video is it's important to ask, what do you want to know? What are you trying to achieve? And knowing that if it's simply to have the right answer, unfortunately, wait to the end of the video, there's good and bad news. When it comes to fuel and oil usage, there are a lot of variables. First off, there are a lot of variables that you can't necessarily compare that are apples to apples from one riding area to another. Some areas that have additional hills, some that have more turns, and then even going on day versus day, trail conditions change. I know that each of you are aware, if you get on a nice ice road, you can really tack these machines up pretty fast and get them going for their top speed. As well as you may come back a day later, you have fresh snow on top of it, and a lot of fresh snow, and it's going to slow you down. There are lake riders that have these things tacked out. There are guys who are riding in the trails and the twisties. There's a lot of variables that come, environmentally speaking, from what your fuel economy is going to be. So first off, you have environmental factors. Second off, you have temperature. Everything from what temperature it is outside to what your pressure is. Also, what your quality of fuel is going into this. How much energy density is in that fuel. And that's also a tremendous list of variables that go into that, as well as how well is your machine running, what's going on with the drag that's going over top of your slides, what is your track lug height, what is the condition of your belt, how aligned are your clutches, how efficient is your machine running, what's the status of your plugs. There are a lot of other variables that go in, from your clutching to your track, etc. But assuming that all of those things are equal and that the environment's the same and that the weather's the same, that we're riding on the exact same trail day in and day out, and that everybody's machine is in the same working order, we then have to look at what I think is the biggest influence and the largest variable. The largest variable that I believe goes into it is the fun flipper, how much you're squeezing ultimately the throttle. And that is anything from racing from turn to turn to taking it easy from turn to turn. You guys know when you're hard on the throttle and then you're hard on the brake going back and forth, obviously you're going to use a lot more energy, and that's pretty obvious. But what isn't obvious, and I actually show a graph here that compares other motors just to give you an idea, is that when you are riding faster, the faster you go, the less efficient your machine is going to be. That's not true out of the gate. Actually, you build efficiency, and then you get to a certain point, and for these machines that might be 40 or 50 or 60 miles an hour right in that area, where it's reaching its peak for efficiency as it's moving along. And as you get faster beyond that point in time, you start to get additional wind resistance. You also get additional friction. It starts to drop that efficiency, and then that motor is then gobbling, big amounts of air and fuel to go along at that same high clip of speed. And so I think the number one factor, and when looking at all this, yes, there are conditions. It's up and down hills. It's in and out of turns. It's, are you going straight? And even considering temperature and environmental, and even considering what's going on with your sleds, the number one thing that's going to impact your fuel usage is how much you are into the throttle. Now, being into the throttle, we call it, being on the pipe, essentially being on the power band and letting that motor continue to eat and throw gasoline at it. It's rather complicated to figure out what it means for me to be on that versus somebody else. But take a look at the studies here. Actually, I have this graph or two that come from automobiles, but it plays out exactly the same.
Is it going to want to go to Copper Harbor?
He might. I do. I know I do.
I'm going.
Hell yeah. We started off the day full of oil, and now we are at 220 miles, and we're going to see if we can fit both of these in there so far. Let's do this. she's going to drink that. She's going to drink them both. Well, we got 220 miles, and I can tell you that I could probably get another half a quart in there. It's not full for sure.
I've almost got 3, Joe.
You putting 3 in there?
Check it. That's how much. 2 plus these 2, empty.
Yeah, nice. So the experiment continues. Okay, so we're doing our second oil fill. I'm gonna put 2 more quarts in at 363.9 quarts. Here we go. Oh, Mike's gonna open them for me. This is good. There's no magic trick here. We're just pouring oil into. In she goes. I'm ready to drink beer. Can you help me open that second one, Mike?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And it could probably take 3, but we're gonna go with the 2 for now. So this will be 4 total of 363, and it's not gonna fill it all the way. It's getting close. Oh, it's close.
I think you might get it.
4 363 is 90 miles. Pretty darn close. So one of the best things I can do then to explain what is dismal or abysmal fuel economy is to really show what we're doing with these machines and ultimately how many, I guess we're going to call it miles per hour that we average on those machines. And it's quite simple. On your machine, everybody has their miles and they have their hours of use. And you go ahead and divide that out and you'll get your number. And I was astounded, a few years ago to take a look at some of that data from a number of other riders. And look, you need to consider that you're incorporating everything in there. You have your idle time, you have the time you're loading in and off your trailers, you have the time you're going to gas stations, you have the time in the morning where you're warming up the machine. You have time where you're in the yard playing around with the kids, which happens, right? You're going to go and goof off. You have the time where you're in and around the shop doing maintenance, where you're driving around relatively slow, and all that gets folded in with your speed when you're rushing down the trail and having a good time. And each of those trails, even though we all know these machines are capable of very, very high speeds sustainably, the reality is once you come into the twisties and come into town, you slow down quite a bit. What I was astounded by is to see that a number of riders, when they were taking their real data, and there were a number of forums I was looking at, it was anywhere from 28. Some guys were saying, hey, we did the calculation, it was 28 miles per hour was our average. And others said, hey, I'm at 32, and hey, I'm at 34. And it was remarkable to me to go and take a look to see where we were relative. This is not a competition by any stretch of the imagination. But what I'll tell you is, if you're looking at a guy who is averaging 28 miles per hour, taking the obviously the miles divided by the hours they have on their sled, versus where Mike and I have been able to achieve about 42. I mean, this is not a competition, like I say. It's just generally what we do on our sleds. Well, if you take a look at, going from 28, it's another 14 to get to 42. That's another 50% higher. And when you're thinking about that, it's a 50% increase in speed. Then going back to the charts and taking a look, obviously, or it should become obvious then, why our fuel consumption is much higher. Quite simply, the best way to look at this is the faster you go, the more fuel that you're going to use. It's that simple. Well, I sure hope I don't get a lot of hate mail and hate comments down below, because you guys have noticed I've been holding on to this near and dear, this bottle of AMSOIL Interceptor. And I'm not here to say that this oil is better or worse than VES. Polaris VES, I always wondered what that stood for. We have a joke around the trail, which is very expensive stuff. It is a little bit more expensive. I'm not going to say that it's a bad oil. I'm not going to say that AMSOIL Interceptor is a better oil. And I know that there's going to be some comments that say I'm doing damage to the motor, and I should be running what the factory recommends. And candidly, I probably would, irregardless of price. I would go ahead and put in VES constantly, but the problem is out on the trail, what we found is that there are many stations that carry this Interceptor, and very few, well, relatively speaking to AMSOIL, there are stations that carry it, but relatively few that carry VES. So if every station that I went to when I need oil had VES, I would just go with VES. I am a firm believer in stick with one oil and don't change out unless you absolutely have to in a bind. If I was in a bind, I would not hesitate to put VES in if I had an empty tank over top of the Interceptor, but it wouldn't be my preferred method of doing it. So that being said, most stations that we go to and most areas that we ride in, we can find AMSOIL Interceptor. And because it's the most prevalent, we just said, fine, we'll stick with it, and away we go. In addition, we find as an extra benefit that it is always cost competitive. Generally speaking, it's less expensive than what we find the VES for. And so that's also good to have. And a number of you guys out there, you can have a preferred customer account with a company like Interceptor. The great question is it a better or worse oil? And I'm not here to say that iPhone's better or worse, AMSOIL is better or worse, or that VES is better or worse. And it's one of those, you get to a point and you blow a motor, let's say at 6,000 or 7,000 miles, and somebody says, oh, it was the oil that you're using, but you're never going to be able to prove definitively what the reason was. The reality is all these synthetic oils, they're all pretty good. There's other videos out there that show the comparison between them. I just wanted to go through why we choose the Interceptor, because it's more readily available and it's more cost competitive, we find, than VES. If VES was available everywhere that we went, we would just go ahead and go with VES, but I don't want to be switching back and forth between two-stroke oils. So coming back to the great debate about fuel mileage and about oil usage and oil mileage. The reality is there's not one single answer. There's way too many variables that go into the equation. All that I can tell you is from the video and showing you is that we received about 91 miles per quart of oil. And in the one instance here, I ran out of gasoline at 107 miles. And if you're looking at that being an effective 11-gallon tank out of the 11.5, then ultimately you can do your calculation to show that I was getting about 10 miles per gallon. There have been other times when I've gotten 15 miles per gallon, and I was really impressed with how far I was stretching that tank out. For us, though, today, what we do is we plan our rides and our trips that we're getting fuel at 90 gallons. One of the continued problems that we noted in our other videos is that our fuel gauge on these new Polaris VR1s is not necessarily dependable, so we have to plan for the worst case scenario. We have to plan for going about 90 miles, no more than 100, and as you can see, I tried to stretch a little bit too far, went to 107, and didn't make it on that particular trip. On other trips, I made it to 116 before running out, and then there's been other times where I've made it to 140 miles and still had, fuel in the tank. So really, what I would say is it varies tremendously. There is no right answer. Often everyone gets excited on these forums about what the mileage is, and I will tell you that it's anywhere between, call it, 10, 9 to 10 miles per gallon, all the way up through, it might be as high as 20 if someone's barely on the throttle, coasting along in perfect conditions. For you, you'll have to figure out in your riding area what is normal, and also be cautious. If you go onto a trail and you know that from town to town, from gas station to gas station, fuel stop to fuel stop is only 100 miles, and you also go out on a day that maybe there's a lot more powder on the trail, the rolling resistance is getting higher, you're recognizing it's taking a lot more throttle to pound through the snow to get to where you're going, you may want to back off your speed a little bit to conserve fuel to make sure that you make it to the next fuel stop. Okay guys, well I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm trying not to cause any additional controversy. Just wanted to give you some additional information from what we found with our real world data. Thanks guys, take care and thanks for watching.
bum 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 bum.